Hashtag every night at 3:07 a.m., someone knocked on her door. The knocking came again. 3 precise taps that jolted Sarah from her fitful sleep. She glanced at her phone, 3:07 a.m. Exactly the same time as yesterday. And the day before. And every night for the past 2 weeks. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she pulled the covers to her chin, paralyzed by a simple question that had begun to consume her life: who, or what, was on the other side of that door? If you're feeling that chill down your spine right now, you're not alone. Stay with me until the end to discover the shocking truth behind Sarah's nightly visitor. I promise it's not what you expect. And if you enjoy stories that keep you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button and subscribe for more tales that blur the line between ordinary life and the unexplainable. Sarah Matthews had always considered herself practical. At 32, she'd built a life defined by routine and reason. Her small apartment on the outskirts of Millfield was nothing special, just a one-bedroom haven where she'd retreated after her divorce 2 years ago. The building itself was unremarkable, a converted Victorian house split into 4 units, with Sarah occupying the top floor. Her neighbors were quiet, mostly keeping to themselves, which suited her just fine. The knocking had begun exactly 16 days ago. The first night, Sarah had stumbled to the door, assuming it was an emergency. Finding the hallway empty had been unsettling, but she'd written it off as a prank or a neighbor with the wrong apartment. By the 3rd night, confusion had given way to fear. By the 7th, she'd stopped opening the door altogether. Tonight, as the knocking faded into silence, Sarah reached for her journal. Sleep was impossible now, so she might as well document this latest incident. The pages were filled with her increasingly desperate attempts to make sense of what was happening. She'd installed a security camera in the hallway, but it never captured anyone approaching her door at 3:07 a.m., despite the clear sound of knocking. She'd sprinkled flour on the floor outside her apartment, but it remained undisturbed each morning. Day 16, she wrote, her handwriting shaky. 3 knocks, as always. No visual on camera. No one there when I checked the peephole. I'm starting to think I'm losing my mind. The next morning, Sarah dragged herself to work at the local library. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her colleagues had begun to notice. "You look terrible," said Diane, the head librarian, as Sarah sorted returns. "Are you still having trouble sleeping?" Sarah hesitated. How could she explain what was happening without sounding crazy? "Just insomnia," she lied. "I'm trying some new meditation techniques." "Well, try harder," Diane said, not unkindly. "You're scaring the children with that zombie look." By afternoon, Sarah had made a decision. She couldn't continue like this. After work, she drove to the only person who might believe her, her grandmother Eleanor, who lived in a small cottage on the edge of town. Eleanor Matthews was 87, with a mind as sharp as her tongue. She welcomed Sarah with a knowing look that suggested she'd been expecting this visit. "You look haunted, child," Eleanor said, pouring tea into delicate cups that had belonged to Sarah's great-grandmother. "And not just by lack of sleep." The words tumbled out of Sarah then, the knocking, the investigations, the growing fear that was consuming her life. Eleanor listened without interruption, nodding occasionally as if Sarah were simply confirming what she already knew. "Have you considered answering it?" Eleanor finally asked when Sarah fell silent. "I did, at first. There's never anyone there." Eleanor's eyes, clouded with cataracts but still penetrating, fixed on Sarah's face. "I don't mean opening the door. I mean truly answering what's calling you." "Grandma, you're not making sense." "Some visitors don't stand in hallways, Sarah. Some knock from places we can't see with our eyes." Eleanor set down her teacup with a decisive click. "The question isn't who's knocking. It's why they're calling for you, specifically, at that specific time." Sarah left her grandmother's house more confused than when she'd arrived. Eleanor had always been slightly mystical, prone to talking about energies and signs, but this was different. There had been real concern in her grandmother's eyes, and something else, recognition. That night, Sarah prepared differently. Instead of hiding under her covers or staring anxiously at her phone, she sat cross-legged on her bed, facing the door. On her nightstand, she placed a small digital recorder she'd borrowed from the library's audio section. If nothing else, she would have proof that the knocking wasn't just in her head. At 3:06 a.m., she closed her eyes and took deep breaths, trying to center herself the way her grandmother had taught her years ago. The minute ticked by, and then... knock. 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 Sarah's eyes flew open, but she didn't move toward the door. Instead, she spoke into the darkness. "Who are you? What do you want from me?" The silence that followed seemed heavier somehow, expectant. Sarah waited, heart pounding, for something, anything, to happen. After several minutes of nothing, she reached for the recorder and played back the audio. The knocks were there, clear as day. But after her questions, there was something else, a sound so faint she had to replay it 3 times to be sure. It was a whisper, barely audible, "Remember." Sleep was impossible after that. Sarah spent the rest of the night researching the significance of 3:07 a.m., looking for any pattern or meaning. Most results were about the witching hour, or devil's hour, typically considered to be 3 a.m., when supernatural activity was said to peak. Nothing specific about 3:07. The next day, Sarah called in sick to work. She needed answers, and she knew where to start. Her grandmother had mentioned something about the time being significant, and Eleanor rarely said things without reason. When Sarah arrived at her grandmother's cottage, Eleanor was in the garden, seemingly unsurprised by the mid-morning visit. "You heard something," Eleanor said, not a question but a statement. Sarah nodded, following her grandmother inside. "It said, 'Remember.' But I don't know what I'm supposed to remember." Eleanor moved to an old cedar chest in the corner of her living room. "I've been waiting for this day," she said, unlocking it with a small key she kept on a chain around her neck. "I just didn't know which of us it would come to." From the chest, Eleanor removed a worn leather journal, its pages yellowed with age. "This belonged to my mother, your great-grandmother Isabel. You need to read it." Sarah took the journal with trembling hands. "What does this have to do with what's happening to me?" "Everything," Eleanor said simply. "Isabel experienced the same thing when she was about your age. The knocking came to her every night at 3:07 a.m. for exactly 21 days. What happened on the 21st day?" Eleanor's expression darkened. "That's what you need to discover. I only know pieces of the story. Isabel never spoke of it openly. But she left this journal, and she made me promise to keep it safe until it was needed." Sarah spent the rest of the day and well into the evening reading her great-grandmother's journal. The early entries were mundane, details of daily life in 1940s Millfield. But about halfway through, the tone changed dramatically. March 15, 1947, Sarah read aloud. "It happened again last night. The knocking at 3:07 a.m., exactly as before. I told Robert it was just the house settling, but he sleeps so deeply he never hears it anyway. I'm afraid to tell anyone what I suspect, that it's Thomas, trying to reach me from wherever he is now." Thomas. Sarah had heard the name before but couldn't place it. She read on, learning that Thomas had been Isabel's younger brother, who had disappeared during a hiking trip in the mountains outside Millfield in 1937. His body was never found, and the case had eventually been closed, ruled as a probable accident. But Isabel had never believed her brother had simply fallen from a trail or been attacked by an animal. The journal entries revealed her conviction that something more sinister had happened, and that someone in Millfield knew the truth. As Sarah continued reading, a pattern emerged. The knocking had begun on the 10th anniversary of Thomas's disappearance. Isabel had initially been terrified, but gradually came to believe it was her brother's spirit, trying to communicate something vital. The final entry, dated April 5, 1947, sent a chill down Sarah's spine. Tonight will be the 21st knock. I know now what Thomas is trying to tell me, and what I must do. If I don't return, this journal will explain everything. The truth cannot stay buried forever. The rest of the pages were blank. Sarah looked up from the journal, her mind racing. Grandma, what happened to Isabel after this? The journal just stops. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. She disappeared that night. Left the house after midnight and never returned. My father, your great-grandfather, reported her missing the next morning. They searched for weeks, but... She shook her head. They found her car parked at the trailhead where Thomas had disappeared a decade earlier, but no trace of Isabel herself. So she vanished, just like her brother, Sarah whispered. Yes. I was only 8 years old. I barely remember her, but I never forgot the promise my father made me keep, to guard this journal until someone needed it. Eleanor reached across the table to grasp Sarah's hand. I always feared this day would come. Sarah's mind was spinning with implications. But why me? Why now? Count the years, child. Thomas disappeared in 1937. Isabel in 1947. It's been exactly 79 years since Isabel vanished. That doesn't explain the connection to me. Eleanor's gaze was steady. You were born on April 5th, the same date Isabel disappeared. And you look just like her, the same eyes, the same determined chin. Some connections transcend what we can easily explain. Sarah returned to her apartment that evening with the journal and a growing sense of purpose that had begun to override her fear. If the pattern held true, she had 5 more nights of knocking before whatever climax awaited her on the 21st day. That night, when the knocking came at 3:07 a.m., Sarah was ready. Thomas, she said clearly into the darkness. I know who you are. I've read Isabel's journal. Tell me what happened to you and to her. The response came not as a whisper this time, but as a sudden drop in temperature that made Sarah's breath visible in the air. The digital recorder on her nightstand switched on by itself, its display glowing in the darkness. Static filled the room, and through it, Sarah heard a voice, young, male, frightened. Cave, behind the waterfall, not an accident, they took. The voice faded, and the temperature returned to normal. Sarah sat frozen, processing what she'd heard. Cave behind the waterfall. There was only one significant waterfall in the mountains near Millfield, Bridal Veil Falls, a popular hiking destination even now. The next morning, Sarah called Diane to request a few days off from the library, citing a family emergency. Then she drove to the local historical society, determined to learn everything she could about Thomas's disappearance and the area around Bridal Veil Falls. The historical society was housed in a former bank building downtown, its archives maintained by volunteers, most of them retirees with deep roots in the community. Sarah approached the front desk, where an elderly man was cataloging photographs. I'm researching a family matter, she explained. I need information about a disappearance that occurred in 1937, Thomas Matthews. The man's friendly expression faltered. Matthews? Any relation to Eleanor Matthews? She's my grandmother. He studied her face for a moment, then nodded. I'm Howard Gaines. I've lived in Millfield my whole life. I remember when Thomas went missing. It was before my time, but it was still talked about when I was a boy. He lowered his voice. And I remember when his sister vanished too. Caused quite a stir. Howard led Sarah to a back room filled with filing cabinets and boxes of documents. Local newspapers from that era are all digitized now, but we keep the originals. And there's a section on unsolved cases. He pulled out a folder labeled Matthews, T. 1937 and handed it to her. Take your time. I'll be up front if you need anything else. The folder contained newspaper clippings, police reports, and photographs from the search for Thomas. Sarah spread them out on the table, looking for any mention of a cave near Bridal Veil Falls. Most of the official reports focused on the main trail, noting that Thomas had been an experienced hiker who knew the area well. One photograph caught her attention: a search party gathered at the base of the falls. In the background, partially obscured by mist, there appeared to be an opening in the rock face. Sarah squinted at the grainy image, wishing for better resolution. A handwritten note on the back of the photo read, "Search team at Bridal Veil, Day 3. No sign of Matthew's boy. J. Blackwood suggests checking cave system, but mayor denies access. Mining company claims unsafe." Mining company? Sarah hadn't known there was mining activity in the area. She returned to the front desk, where Howard was sorting through donation receipts. "Mr. Gaines, was there mining near Bridal Veil Falls in the 1930s? Howard looked up, his expression guarded. "Officially? No. But there were rumors about a small operation up there, not sanctioned, mind you. The Blackwood family owned most of that mountain back then. They were looking for silver, I think." "Blackwood," Sarah repeated. That name was mentioned in a note about the search for Thomas. Howard nodded slowly. "James Blackwood. He was the black sheep of the family, opposed his father's mining ventures, became something of an environmentalist before that was even a term. He died young, though, car accident in 48 or 49. Right after Isabel Matthews disappeared," Sarah noted. Howard's eyes narrowed. "What exactly are you investigating, Miss Matthews?" Sarah hesitated, then decided on a partial truth. "I found my great-grandmother's journal. She seemed to believe her brother's disappearance wasn't an accident. I'm just trying to understand what happened." "Some stones are better left unturned," Howard said quietly. "Especially in small towns with long memories. Are any of the Blackwoods still in Millfield?" Howard sighed. "Just one, Margaret Blackwood. James's daughter. She must be in her 80s now. Lives in the old family home on Crescent Hill." He paused. "But I wouldn't bother her if I were you. The Blackwoods have had their share of tragedy." Sarah thanked Howard for his help and left with photocopies of the most relevant documents. As she walked to her car, she couldn't shake the feeling that Howard knew more than he was saying, and that he was warning her away from something. That night, the knocking came again at 3:07 a.m. This time, Sarah was sitting in a chair facing the door, the recorder ready. "Thomas," she said after the 3 knocks faded. "I'm going to help you. I know about the cave behind the waterfall, and I know about the Blackwoods. What happened to you there?" The response was stronger this time. The lights flickered, and a cold breeze swept through the room despite the closed windows. The recorder captured a longer message, the voice clearer. "Not just me. Others too. The mine, they found something. Not silver. Something older. Blackwood tried to stop them. They took me when I saw. Isabel came looking, find Margaret. She knows." The next day, Sarah drove to Crescent Hill, an affluent neighborhood overlooking Millfield. The Blackwood house was easy to spot, a sprawling Victorian mansion set back from the road, surrounded by ancient oak trees. Despite its grandeur, the property had an air of neglect, with overgrown gardens and peeling paint. Sarah hesitated at the wrought iron gate, suddenly uncertain. What would she say to Margaret Blackwood? "Hello, I think your father knew something about my great-uncle's disappearance, and by the way, I'm being visited by his ghost every night at 3:07 a.m. Before she could decide, the front door of the mansion opened, and an elderly woman emerged onto the porch. She was tall and straight-backed despite her age, with silver hair pulled into a neat bun. She raised a hand, beckoning to Sarah. Surprised, Sarah pushed open the gate and walked up the stone path to the house. "You must be Isabel's granddaughter," the woman said without preamble. "You have her eyes." "Great-granddaughter, actually," Sarah corrected. "I'm Sarah Matthews. Are you Margaret Blackwood? The woman nodded. I've been expecting someone from your family for a long time. Come inside. The interior of the mansion was like stepping back in time, heavy Victorian furniture, faded wallpaper, and the musty smell of a house that had seen two.